Welcome to another episode of Michigan Tech's Husky Hour. In this episode of Husky Hour, Dayna and a panel of guests talk about a phenomenon that everyone experiences: failure. Learn about dealing with downfalls you may encounter, finding ways to turn failures into feedback, and resources that are available to help you learn from your mistakes. Enjoy!
I'm Dayna Browning, and I'm the Assistant Director for Education and Outreach at the Center for Student Mental Health and Wellbeing. We're talking about overcoming failure.
I'm Bailey. I'm one of the wellness interns this semester, and we are going to talk about failure today. We have some nice panelists.
Yeah, so I'm Maria. I am a fourth-year finance major.
So my name's Sarah. I'm the Director of Student Athlete Wellness and Clinical Counselor here at Tech. So this is my second year in the position, and basically I serve as an in-house clinician for our student athletes here. So that's me.
Hi, my name is Peyton Bainbridge. I'm a fourth-year chemistry major at Tech. I'm also a success coach. I've been working at the Success Center for the last 2.5 years, so that's my kind of bread and butter.
Yeah, hi, I'm Aaron Hoover. I'm here because I'm Secretary of Graduate Student Government, and we were asked to kind of participate. But we got to choose where we participated, and I've done lots of failing in my life, and so have become a little bit of an expert at it.
So let's just get this started with, what is failure to you guys? How do you recognize failure, like after it happens?
I have in my life, I've washed out of school even. My first attempt at undergrad, I left in my sophomore year with a 1.9 GPA. After it happens, it's really easy to recognize failure, right? The skill that I could have used at the time was seeing it coming, right? I had one semester where I got a couple of Fs and I'm like, well, I've been a little depressed and distracted and I just need to buckle down and work harder. And that's what I told my academic counselor. And then the next semester I failed every single class. For me, it was a question of not being realistic about what my capacities were in that moment. Like, the wise thing for me would have been to recognize that a couple of Fs in a semester is something to worry about, and either come up with a real concrete plan that wasn't just positive thinking, or take a short break and sort myself out.
Yeah, that positive thinking, it's super helpful, but you're right. Sometimes you have to notice, like, I don't know if I can just keep praying for that A today. I maybe should put in a little more effort.
Yeah, Aaron, I think you hit on a good point there in terms of, expectations that we have for ourselves, and if our expectations maybe need to be adjusted to help us accomplish things and help us to be realistic with what we should be expecting of ourselves and of our outcomes, then if we adjust those expectations, we have a better chance of succeeding.
I think that's right. And then, like, as a humanities scholar, part of what I would say is that, like, self-transformation has to take place concretely, right? It's not just the case that you can be like, I'm going to try harder next time. Like, you need to put systems and, as much as possible, like physical objects in place, or get them out of place, like get rid of your PlayStation if that's what's giving you the trouble, right? In place for you to be able to improve. It's not the case that you can just, like, through pluck alone, magically become another person.
Another form of failure, like, I've never truly failed a class, but I've had goals that I've set up for myself that I know I failed at. And sometimes when it comes to college, you can set up expectations and goals for yourself, but that whole actuality of what you're doing, your effort, your action is more important than your words sometimes. And I come to find that I failed in life in some goals I've set up because of my words alone. And I didn't take the action I needed to do. I can say what I'm going to do, but if I don't actually do it, you're never going to get anywhere. And that's a recognition that is really difficult. So anybody going through something where you have a goal set up that you aren't able to achieve, that's where that recognition needs to come in. And you need to talk with somebody, or kind of have that reflection within. It matters on the person.
Yeah, and I just kind of spinning around to the other side of this question, I think one of the ways I know when I fail, I have a lot of physical side effects from that. And, like, I feel a burning on my neck and my face, and, like, I feel like I'm going to throw up. And, like, last week, I think it was last week, 2 weeks ago maybe, I gave a presentation to GSG, and I just felt like I totally bombed it, and it was horrible. And I was like, I had all these activities planned of, like, changing your screen backgrounds, and literally, like, one person put their camera on. No issue with GSG, Aaron. No, don't. But I hadn't really thoroughly thought that out and thought maybe that's a little too much for these students today on a Zoom seminar, that they weren't expecting to do all that. And so like I literally could not sleep that night. And also my boss's husband attended it, and I was like, he is just telling her over dinner like Dayna is awful and total mess. And then it turns out he didn't think that. I just thought that about myself, and I know I probably could have done better, but I had a lot of physical symptoms and I didn't really know how to handle that other than like watch Netflix and distract myself and mindfully tell myself to let it go. But that just kind of didn't work in that moment. But the next day I felt better.
Well, Dayna,
Yeah,
I do like what you said though, in terms of like failure is a moment, right? Failure does not define who you are. It does not define your semester. It doesn't define your day or your week, right? It's a moment. And so we do have a little bit of choice, and we have a little bit of an opportunity, right? To take that moment and see where we can go from there. So I like how you touched on that a little bit with your response.
Yeah, it's really good to remind ourselves it's a moment. And you know, in retrospect, I was doing some coping techniques by like watching something on Netflix and just knowing, I knew that time would pass and I'd feel okay again, but it was pretty miserable while it was happening.
Yeah, on that physical aspects, you also have to kind of be careful of who you take out your stress of failure on, because I know that like last week I walked out of my exam just feeling like I completely bombed it. I walked out and I was like, I failed, I'm gonna cry, I'm emotional. And then my mom tried to talk to me and I just snapped at her and I was mad and angry. And then about 30 minutes later, I came back and I was like, Mom, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't mean that. I was just angry because I didn't do well. And then she said some sassy remark back, but I mean, we were fine. But you got to be careful who you can like let that aggression out on, because if it would have been anyone other than my mom, I think they'd probably have been mad at me.
I think it's really important, like you just said, that like you have those moments of blowing up, and that might be your coping mechanism to let out all that like frustration in yourself, in the situation, in the moment. And one thing that I always think about is those might not be perfect, but if you can kind of forecast it, because you're going to fail a lot in your life. Let's be honest. I failed a lot in my life in different aspects, but if you know how to identify that and then figure out a way to get around that. So I did the same thing. My mom calls me or my dad called me after an exam. I'm like, don't talk to me. I'm over it. I'm dropping out of college. And I do a whole freak out for no reason. Right. And then you come out of that and they're like, oh, gee, but you realize that that's a way for you to identify it. So just making sure you have that under control, because that does ruin relationships really fast.
Yeah, and I think, you've got to let yourself have that, right? You need to be allowed to have your day or so of just being upset. And if you know that you become kind of a toxic person when you're upset, then you let the people around you know, look, I'm really upset. I'm going to be spending some time by myself. Just kind of leave me be for a day or so. And then look, if you're trying to make yourself feel better, like the number one way, as a person who wrestles with chronic depression, the number one way to make yourself feel better is to find a way to brighten someone else's day. If you can find somebody to help, somebody who needs someone to lean on, like it's such an easy little thing to just make somebody else's day happier, even if you feel like garbage. And then you'll feel like a better person because you helped somebody.
How can you turn failures or, like a shortcoming into an opportunity? You just said that you can, make an opportunity to make someone else feel better. How are there some other ways that we can turn failures into kind of like a success?
I know whenever I fail, I personally use my failures as kind of like to set up goals moving forward to like improve on that. So if I do like realize I failed like an exam or something, I would make a goal for myself to put more time aside to work on that certain class or like improve on whatever I failed at in the first place, because I really personally, I'm sure many people are with me on this, but I don't like failing. So I always make it a very like a goal not to fail and like ways to avoid that kind of feeling.
Yeah, I think that's just such a good thing to recognize. Like nobody likes failing. And so for me, a lot of it is like, how can I reframe my failures as like tests? Sometimes it's reframing it going into it. Like this is going to be a practice, or this is going to, like, for interviewing, I always thought of job interviewing as like, this is a practice for the job that I'll get later on. And then I'd get some of those jobs. So sometimes for me, that's been a really good strategy.
I also think failing in general, I think anything you do in college is a learning opportunity. Anything you do outside of life and work and academics and your job after college, when you were in high school, those are all learning opportunities, and it doesn't change. So when you fail, it's just another opportunity to grow. And that's a great thing, is you realize that failing doesn't define you. Failing is just a recognition that something needs to change. And it's not huge changes, not small changes. It could be anything. And that's where, if you commit to a learning mindset or a growth mindset, you can get over any failure with your self-determination. And it's with friends or with a coach or with anyone, it can be done. And it's not a mindset, it's just a moment. So I think growth is the key word when you're trying to find the potential within failure.
Yeah, I agree with that very much. And then in addition, I would say, I mean, there's this tendency to say something like, I failed. And I think that is too limited of a viewpoint, right? There was a situation and it didn't work out, right? You were a part of that situation, but you sure weren't the whole thing. And so, like, the question isn't necessarily to apportion, like, how much of the blame is on me and how much of the blame is on GSG being a bunch of deadbeats and not paying attention. Rather, I think, the question is, like, how could we change the situation? What different systems, different practices can we put in place so that a situation like this one doesn't repeat itself, right? As much as I'm in favor of individual responsibility, I think, for me at least, blaming myself just made it worse, because then I got sad and embarrassed and didn't want to show my face around people and went to class less and less, and eventually just stopped going altogether, because you can't fail at something you're not doing, right? Where if I'd had a good read of the situation, I could have tried to figure out, well, what needs to change here? Does my transportation situation need to change? Are there friends I'm hanging out with who are not good for me? Is there something I'm doing way too much of? Right? But what needs to be altered in this situation that can turn it into a good one instead of a bad one?
Well, and when we talk about, situational pieces too, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the times when we're talking about failure or thinking about failure, we think of it in a very dichotomous way, right? Like, we either did it or we didn't. We failed or we succeeded. It happened or it didn't happen, right? And so, because there tends to be that yes or no, that dichotomous mentality, right? It doesn't really leave a lot of room for error. And so I think sometimes just taking that opportunity and reframing and stepping back and looking at things in less of that black and white mentality can really help with looking at it as an opportunity, or looking at it in that growth mentality.
I like that, like, looking at it from a bigger picture. I like to, if I fail an exam, I like to look at it as, well, I didn't get a 0. I failed a portion of this exam. I didn't understand this part. Okay, like, let's look at how much I did know, and, like, I did pass this much of the exam. Try and spin it in a positive light to just focus, like, I need to study on this material next time, and, like, I know that this is where I struggled, and just use it as an opportunity to grow.
I think that's such a good point. I think our tendency as humans is to focus on the negative because we want to protect ourselves, right? It's a self-defense mechanism of, like, danger, run away from that, like, failing, run away from that, versus looking at the positive pieces. I do a lot of academic support for students who are struggling both with mental health issues and, like, severe academic issues. And I often start out with an intake where I ask students about their academic strengths. And that's usually really shocking for students, which is also kind of sad. Like, why aren't we talking more about the good things that we're doing? But it's also just the way we are. We aren't necessarily programmed or taught to look for the good in ourselves all the time. And so I think that's just something really helpful to, like, step back and say, what did I do right first? And then you can identify really clearly what are the things that I need to work on. And oftentimes you can use the strengths to help with your, failures or whatever. So I ask students, what's your strength in learning? Because everybody's obviously learned enough to get here. So there's something that you're good at, and those are things that we've, like, forgotten about or left behind in high school. And then you get here and it's like, oh yeah, I was really good at drawing my ideas or something. It's like, well, just because the teacher's not making you do it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. So let's go back to some of those positive things that you can do.
Right. I think that's so important too. Just because your professors aren't necessarily making you do all of that busy work from high school, all of those busy work ideas were great study tips, like great study tools. If you are struggling, think back to your high school teachers and what they would have you do for those chapters and try some of them out. Yes, they might seem time consuming, but it actually helps a lot and like prevents failure, kind of.
Yeah, and then I mean, don't forget that when you pay tuition, you're paying to be part of a community, right? And so there are other students who are maybe struggling with the things that you're doing well at and not doing well with the things that you are good at. And that there are learning labs and tutors and other resources available here. Like when you come to a university, you come to a community. And Michigan Tech, I've been at a few universities, and Michigan Tech is the one that I'm willing to say is genuinely committed to helping students who are struggling to succeed. Every university gestures at it, but some of them really just don't care. This one does, like genuinely does care. And if you reach out to the dean of students, you're going to get some support from them, right? And so use all these resources that you are, after all, paying for.
I think that's another thing with failure. That's kind of like the psychology of how we develop over life. We spend our childhood being really dependent on others. Teenage years, you're trying to be like, Mom, Dad, leave me alone. I'm independent. And so then you end up in college where you're like still in that I want to be independent phase, but also you're starting to realize you need others and you need the community. It's just not your parents anymore or your teachers. So I think that's so important to remember, like you're entering the next phase of creating your support system. I mean, you have to be really deliberate, but I know we have 2 success coaches here. So I was wondering if maybe you could one of you could walk us through like what it's like to make an appointment and to get help with academics from the Success Center.
So in success coaching, our whole premise, we used to be academic success coaching, but now we're success coaching because we wanted to take a holistic approach really with how we help students. So how to set up an appointment varies, because if you're on campus, like people are, you can have in-person success coaching appointments with, of course, COVID procedure. And you could also have now remote with me. I'm in California, so it's a little bit of difference. But pretty much the procedure is you can email success@mtu.edu, where you will be thrown to Karen, our greatest asset in the Water Center, and she will help you set up an appointment. Additionally, I think all of our emails are on our Success Center webpage. So if you go to the mtu.edu and you look up the Success Center itself, you will have all of our emails, and we can take in some just like questions that you have, or also help you set up an appointment. There's different appointments as well. You can do weekly appointments where we talk to you weekly and we build a relationship and help you through the semester whenever you start to whenever you want to end, kind of. Additionally, we can do one-time appointments. So if you need to come in just to talk about what you're dealing with right now, or set up a bracket or a plan for this next 2 weeks, we can always do that as well, or do bi-weekly or whatever fits your needs and your situation. Additionally, what we do with academic help is we have to be a little bit more transparent with what you're dealing with in your situation. So your grades might be a question or comment on how you're doing, but we don't judge, of course, that's deferred. We want to help you figure out your plan. So one thing we like to do is set up habits. And that's what we love to do, is figure out a healthy, successful habit plan for you to do successful in classes. That can be planning on where to study, how to prioritize your time to make sure that you're spending enough time studying, or how to make your time more efficient or useful. So we do a lot of exercises using different tools like a 168, or I have a focus calendar set up so you can work on game planning for exams. So we have a lot of awesome resources at the Water Center and at the Success Center that can help any student if you want.
Thanks. Yeah, and obviously we have 12 learning centers across campus, and the other ones focus more on each individual subject. So those are just good things to remind ourselves of and to take advantage, because yeah, like Erin mentioned, you're part of this community and you're also kind of paying for all of it with your tuition already. So you might as well take advantage of everything that's out there for you.
And a part of this community, don't forget that your classmates are your best friends. When you're trying to figure out an assignment, they are right there with you. They are trying to work on the same assignments you are, trying to understand the material. Talk to your neighbor, maybe message someone privately in the Zoom chat, say, hey, you want to get a study at 6 p.m. on Tuesday? I don't know, pick a day. Like your friends are there to help you as well. Like they want to get through it just as much as you do. So don't be afraid or shy to like reach out to your classmates.
Like as somebody who's
Those
been out of
people.
school for a while, those friends that you study with and who help each other can open a lot of doors for you throughout the course of your life. I'm almost 45 years old right now. But look, the friends that I made in undergrad, we're still opening doors for each other, right? Helping each other get work published, helping each other find jobs. So it's not just like right now, this person could help me get a better grade or I could help them get a better grade in calculus or chemistry. It's we could support each other throughout our entire lives.
I had one friend here my freshman year, my first semester, and I told him coming into it, I do not understand calculus. I'm going to need help with calculus. And he's like, okay, we'll make a math learning center appointment. So I did, but I also went to his room every Monday, Wednesday, Friday when I had an assignment due and had him help me through every problem. Yes, he probably was super annoyed by me at the end, but are we still friends? Yes. And did I pass? Yes.
Oh, one other thing I wanted to say, and this is something that goes along with the community aspect and what we pay for at Tech with your tuition, is your professors are set up and they want you to pass and succeed. And that is not a question. Every professor on campus wants to succeed. So use them as well. Office hours nowadays get overlooked time and time again because we're afraid to come in and be like, I don't get it. Sorry. Like that's hard for some people to go into. So I want to push that if you have an open and honest conversation and a good rapport with your professors, they will be that help too when it comes to a really hard question that no one else knows, or even your learning center coaches will be like, what the heck, when you get up to those higher levels, it's hard. So I want to preface that your relationship and your communication with your professor is also very important on how you will succeed in the class as well, if you need help, more or less.
And I think a tip, just a concrete tip on going to professors to ask for questions. I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Peyton said, but I think sometimes people don't know what they want to say to a professor other than, I just don't understand this. So I recommend that before you go in and say, I don't understand this, because you're probably going to get like not great feedback from your professor of just like, why don't you try the study sheet I already gave you and you looked at, is to go through the steps to yourself. Like say it as if you're teaching it, or write out each step of what you're trying to figure out. And that way you can point out, or you can show the professor, these are the steps that I came up with and I keep getting the wrong answer. They can see the error. Or you might get to step 3 of something and go, yep, that's where I'm lost. And then you can tell them, these are the things I can do and here's where I'm lost. And they've probably seen that before and they can tell you exactly how to fix that problem. But it's really hard for them to just, it could be like 100 different things that you're doing wrong if they don't have that specific guidance. So, and oftentimes you might actually figure out the problem yourself.
Sorry, as someone who holds office hours, come prepared to make good use of the time. But then as somebody who never went to office hours because I was terrified of professors aren't scary. Like they're just ordinary humans. And even the ones who seem kind of severe and strict in class, when you take that step of making an appearance to them as a person in their office hours, which they sit in alone for weeks for no reason, they will immediately be more positively inclined towards you. Like you can make friends that way too, and those people can open doors for you.
Husky Hour is brought to you by the Center for Student Mental Health and Well-Being. Visit mtu.edu/well-being for more information about programs, events, and workshops. Thanks for listening.